We are rocking and rolling right into a brand new show and a brand new day. It's IB Nation Sports Talk. Glad to have you with us here today, along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. How's your day gone, Jesse?
Not too bad. We had a free burrito. Well, not free, but we had burritos at lunch today. So
Ah,
brought in by work. So I can't complain
relatively
about
free. Well, it sounds like it's free if they were brought in by work. As well, if you didn't have to pay for them.
free on my end. Yes.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's free. You can say it. All
So
right.
that
Well,
was
hit that
nice.
like button to everybody logging in right now. We've got a lot to talk about as we continue with the offensive coordinator talk. You and Vince and I did the rapid fire show Friday when we talked all about Tommy Reese leaving. And so this is going to be your first opportunity to jump into, the bigger conversation, some of the candidates and all that kind of stuff. Are you fired up? Are you ready to go?
Yeah, it's I've been mulling around doing a lot of reading in regards to Tommy Reese's departure and kind of potential people coming in. And I guess I'm just so shocked still of like all of this negative talk around Tommy Reese. And I know we kind of talked about it a lot on Friday, but again, it's just the number one belief that I have is Nick Saban isn't coming calling if you're doing bad things. And I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that.
All right. Well, Jason says he typically agrees with you a lot. So, we'll see if that continues here tonight. There was no Salty to put me on the clock tonight, so I wasn't sure when exactly I was supposed to start since he didn't put me on the clock. I'll say this before we get into the conversation, and we touched on this yesterday. I saw a tweet from Tyler James this afternoon, and Tyler said, "Remember this during coaching search season. There will be clout chasing social media accounts taking small morsels of information reported/suggested by actual reporters and exaggerating them to make you think they know what's happening. Spoiler alert, they probably don't." And I think it's great advice. And I think that Irish Breakdown subscribers, viewers, listeners, the whole thing, we're going to give you good information, and it is good sourced information, So like if you subscribe to the Champions Lounge, you see all the good IB intel there. And we're not just like at this point, we're not throwing darts at the wall. Like all the names we mentioned on yesterday's show have come from very credible sources telling us that those names, have in are we're at least at some point names of interest in this coaching search for Notre Dame, and it's like it's I'm not going to say any names, but like I watch college football too, and everybody watches college football too. That doesn't give everybody like actual sourced information, because you watch college football, and that's what I'm saying. Like when I'm saying half baked, I'm not talking about other actual reporters on the Notre Dame beat because there are a lot of good ones there. I'm talking about, again, like Tyler was saying, the clout chasers, that have a Twitter account, who follow the guys and maybe they're subscribed to a premium board someplace or whatever, and then they grab some little morsels of information and then they try to act like it's their own out there in Twitter land. Again, if you subscribe to IB, you're getting good information. So I think that most everybody here knows that by now. But I just figured I would get that out there because there's a lot. Again, we're at that time where there's a lot of stuff floating around out there. But also, like we said yesterday, we're only going to comment on the things that Irish Breakdown has actual intel on. We won't comment on other things or people that other outlets are reporting unless we have our own information on it. So, with that being said, a couple things to start about. We talked a lot about Byron Leftwich yesterday, the former Tampa Bay offensive coordinator, and there's still reports about him. That according to our intel, that's not happening at this point. And no Brian Johnson, the Eagles quarterback coach, either. We have very good sourced information on both those things. And according to our sourced information, our sources, Byron Leftwich and Brian Johnson, not happening. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't some kind of contact one way or another, but not going forward anymore. So, I don't know if you're happy or sad, like if you were in the Byron Leftwich camp, Jesse. Neither Vince or I were necessarily that hot on it. It was a little bit mixed here in the show yesterday, but Byron Leftwich appears that's already kind of come and gone at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm indifferent when it comes to Byron Leftwich. I think the biggest draw is the NFL experience and the success that he had with Tom Brady. And I know that before that it was Jameis Winston, and Jameis Winston had a lot of interceptions, but he also had a lot of passing yards and a lot of passing touchdowns, and he was asked to throw the ball quite a bit as well. So obviously, when you're asked to throw the ball at a higher rate, you have a higher chance of interceptions. That doesn't excuse obviously leading the NFL in interceptions, of course, but you're going to have probably a higher number compared to usual. So I don't mind Byron Leftwich. I just don't know how his game would fit into the college scheme of things. So again, I'm indifferent. Haven't done a ton of research on it, but overall, I think the biggest con again would be, I don't know that his game would necessarily translate from the NFL to college in a smooth fashion.
Yeah. So yesterday we talked a lot about some of the different names and some pros and cons to those guys. We'll mention some of the same names today, but one thing that I have seen is a lot of people asking, what are your criteria? What are the main criteria that you think whoever the next offensive coordinator is needs to meet, to be the guy for this job? So that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And David Flores, before we get to that, asking, Sean, do you know if the OC for Oregon State is a candidate that is getting a call? Have heard nothing about him at this point. He is, again, I don't know if there's a report to that, but we have heard nothing at this point. And, talked to Brian and we went over who's hearing what and all that kind of stuff a little bit ago. That is not someone that we're hearing right now. So again, I have no idea what anybody else is reporting on that. So when we talk about these criteria, Jess, how important is it to you that they go outside rather than promoting someone, already on the staff? There were, kind of a mixed bag. Obviously, Tommy Rees was a holdover after a head coaching change. And so at this point, how important is it to you that they get somebody from outside rather than an internal promotion?
To me, I think a 100% has to be someone external and not internal. I'm not a fan of internal promotions, and not to bring it all back to the Cowboys, but they just promoted Marty Schottenheimer from within, and I thought that was a horrible decision. I think when you're not struggling, but when you're looking for something new, a lot of internal guys can get comfortable with kind of what's been done maybe in the past or in the prior, rather than bringing something new and fresh, to an offense. And I think that's exactly what Notre Dame kind of needs in this situation, is a fresh set of eyes, someone who's, maybe you can look at the film from last year and pick up, the good things that Notre Dame did, and then also kind of look at the deficiencies that they also had, and how you can improve on said deficiencies with your own scheme. So I'm a big proponent of bringing in someone fresh, because I think it's a new perspective. And again, you're not going to get comfortable with kind of what Tommy Rees did last year. You're going to kind of build your own scheme or your own system. And I think that's what Notre Dame needs. And I think that's a lot often what teams need when they're going after a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator, whatever coordinator it might be. You're looking to change things up and find a guy who can put his stamp on the personnel that Notre Dame has.
Yeah, and we talked about this yesterday with Tommy Rees. Like there were obviously the roots of what he knows. Now he's added to what he learned from Brian Kelly, but the roots of what he has went to Brian Kelly. So even though you lost a head coach, you still had, a lot of this, those basic tenets of the offense were right back to Brian Kelly. And like with Jared Parker being the prime internal candidate right now, we know that he worked at Penn State, but what we also know is he wasn't running his own offense. He was calling plays from someone else's offense. So like, how exactly would that look? Like, does he have, what he's worked for Tommy Rees? does, and and he called plays in someone else's offense. So does he have like his own basic, kind of philosophy? What would that look like? And I agree. I think that where you are right now, you need, you know, again, we're going to talk about some of these other criteria, but I think that going outside is going to be much better for Marcus Freeman than an internal promotion at this point. Even though you have a guy who's got some OC experience on the staff. My next question for you, again, kind of related to what I was just talking about, in comparison to what Tommy Rees was doing offensively, what's maybe the biggest change that you want to see from the offense going forward with whoever the next guy is?
I want to see more involvement out of the running backs outside of just running the ball. I think that their biggest overall strongest position this past season was their running back room, and I feel like they weren't utilized enough in the pass game and what you can achieve using running backs that can be on the field simultaneously together. And just because you have two running backs on the field, you can use them as decoys, you can use them as check down routes, you can use them in motion a lot to see what coverage you're in. There's just so many different things that you can do with using those two running backs. Maybe even I would go as far to say three running backs, and just using them in the pass game, using them on the edge to set blocks when you're trying to get around the corner. There's just so many different things that you can do, and so I would like an offensive coordinator that realizes what his most talent in the room is, and then finding ways to get those guys, the ball, or get them involved in plays on a consistent basis, because we all knew that Notre Dame had obviously, the top tight end in the country. If you don't want to admit that, you can say top two tight end in the country. And then I would argue the best running back room in the country.
Yeah.
And they were lacking, at the wide receiver position, but yet they didn't find ways to get their running backs more involved in the passing game. When you have someone like Chris Tyree, who's a jackknife type of guy, who can run the ball, who can get on the edge, who can catch passes out of the backfield, stuff like that. So I think that we need to see an offensive coordinator again that can incorporate what his strengths are and not be afraid to kind of go all in on what those strengths are.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Like, you had the best tight end, single individual tight end in the country, but as a position group, the running back room was your best offensive position, especially from a skill position standpoint, and they needed to use that more. And I mean, you're singing my tune. I was singing it all season long, especially in relation to Chris Tyree. But all those guys can catch, and that has to be, and I was touching on a little bit yesterday. Like, I wouldn't be opposed to like Dylan McCullough being running game coordinator. And now I don't know how much of that, like when you talk about him being running game coordinator, would correlate to what you're talking about with getting the running backs involved in the passing game and stuff like that. But he has roots to the Andy Reid system, and Andy Reid's system going all the way back to Philadelphia has always incorporated the running backs quite a bit, throwing them the football quite a bit. And I think that they need to do more of that. And, so definitely that, especially right now, because that is your greatest position of strength. And when you've got a guy like Chris Tyree completely underutilized, you have to find a way to get him in. I'd like to see more RPOs in the offense as well. I think that is something that has been lacking, and in today's game, I think it makes sense to get to have more RPOs in the offense, and with the kind of quarterbacks that they're going to have, it's something that they can definitely use. And like look at it from the defensive side of the ball. I think we've talked about it before. Do you agree with that as well? Is that something you'd like to also see?
Yeah, and I definitely believe that RPO should be a part of the offense, especially I'm an adamant believer that there's going to be Buckner led packages, even though he probably won't be the starter next season. I still think he gets clock and playing time in specific packages, and we've seen him develop as a passer. And so now when you have the dual threat, or the legit threat of passing and running with Buckner's legs and arms, I would like to see more of that RPO stuff, and especially from a defensive perspective, it just makes the linebackers have to honor and be almost a step or two behind, depending on if it's run or pass, because you don't know, you're going to have to step up and honor the run every time. And then once you've hit enough runs, and you pull that, and now you've got 2 to 3 steps on a linebacker, and maybe some sort of man coverage, or the linebacker is late to dropping to his middle of the field hole, where you can hit a tight end on a seam over the middle. There's just so many things you can do by influencing the linebackers, and RPO is exactly what that accomplishes. Is it gets the attention of the linebacker's eyes and feet when they have to honor those plays, stepping up, on play action or just straight up run.
See, you can't get Derek's mind out of the burritos now, since you
It's
said you
funny
had a free
because I
burrito
haven't had a
earlier.
true burrito in a long time. Like, whenever I go to Chipotle or, some of the other kind of similar, chains restaurants around here, I always just get a bowl because, I'm not a huge fan of the extra, calories, carbs that the burrito gives you. And so when we were given the option of just burritos, I was like, wow, this is really good. I haven't had a legit burrito in a really long time. I got the barbacoa in there, so it was nice and spicy. It was a good time during lunch today.
Yeah, and a lot of people commenting on the RPOs. More RPOs means Moorhead, of course, Joe Moorhead, the Akron head coach, who has been at Oregon and Penn State. Um, that's that moves it. Like if if RPOs are a must, then I think that definitely moves Moorhead up. And there's some other things that I think move Moorhead up on this list as well. As we kind of check through some of these different criteria that we're talking about. Is there like one most important criteria that you're looking at, whether it's quarterback development, play calling, recruiting, like we've seen other people say, being a teacher. And that's something Brian wrote about on Irish Breakdown. And Joe says, someone who believes in Notre Dame and what she stands for. B, relentless recruiter who goes after top talent consistently. C, uses the talent on the team to maximize what they can do. And I think those are all really good points. So is there kind of one criteria for you, Jess, that stands above the others?
I really liked that C, maximizing talent, but I kind of was hinting at that already. So I would say that another big one for me is I want to see success across multiple levels, meaning that I want to see offensive success at multiple pit stops. I don't want it to be a guy who's kind of been maybe just now starting out. I guess what I'm saying is I want a proven track record, and a guy that has shown that he can get it done at maybe at the college level and the NFL level, or maybe at a Power 5 level and a non-Power 5 level. Like, I know Vince said he doesn't want a MAC guy, but to me those MAC guys are really appealing because it's hard to work with what you got talent wise at the MAC level, right? You're not getting an abundance of 3, 4, 5-star recruits. And so really what shines at that level is scheme, in my opinion, because how can you out scheme guys with the talent that you have? And so then when you can upgrade your talent, I think the scheme can also be upgraded as well.
Yeah, and I think that Vince was, kind of talking about more like with the Mac guys, like Jason Candle. I think he was, referring more specifically to someone like that because, like with Moorhead, even though he's in the Mac now, he's been a head coach at Mississippi State. He's obviously been a coordinator at some bigger programs like Oregon and Penn State as well. This guy has been around a while. He's a veteran. He's coached at some big schools in some big environments. So even though he's at a MAC school right now, he's it's not again it's nothing against Candle because he's a really good coach, but he came from Mount Union and then to Toledo, and he hasn't branched outside that yet. So even though again he's a really good football coach for where he is, I'm not sure that this is necessarily the fit right now for what Notre Dame needs in an offensive coordinator.
No, yeah, and I 100% get that too. I guess the point I was just trying to get out is I'd like to see the track record across multiple different like levels, right? Like I want to see it. You've worked your way up. You've had you kind of come up from the bottom. You've had success here, success there. To me, when you go to place after place and you're the common denominator of why this success is happening, that's ultimately what I'm looking for. An offense that struggled maybe a year before, a year or two before, and now they bring in a new guy who has had proven success at other places, and he's able to quickly turn it around, essentially, is what I would be looking at the most.
Right. Quarterback development, play calling, recruiting are some of the criteria that we have. So, again, without ranking necessarily the importance of each, is there, like, when you look at quarterback development and you look at who some of these different candidates are, who would you maybe say is like the ideal guy in terms of a guy who you trust the most to develop the quarterback, or would trust the most to develop the quarterback?
See, that's a good question.
I I'll just say this, and I mentioned this yesterday. Like, Trace McSorley, when Moorhead was at Penn State, he became the first Penn State quarterback to have back-to-back 3,000-yard seasons. And, again, McSorley is like your classic, this is a college quarterback.
That's a definition of a Penn State quarterback, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's right. And Trace McSorley, what is it now? 5-6 years later, he's on an NFL roster still. He's on the Arizona Cardinals roster. He's a backup and, drawing a paycheck still. And so I think it's very safe to say that Moorhead maxed out every bit of talent out of Trace McSorley when he was at Penn State.
And that honestly was kind of the guy that I was leaning towards before you said that, just because of, his OC and quarterback experience. And, you listed off play calling, recruiting, and quarterback development. I'm not so much as high on, yes, I want the new OC to be a great recruiter, but it's not the top priority for me. I think Notre Dame is loaded with guys who can recruit, obviously led by Marcus Freeman, who does, the bulk of the work because he is Marcus Freeman. He's one of the nation's top recruiters. To me, the number one thing I'd be looking for out of those is quarterback development. And solely because I think that's the position that will take Notre Dame over the top. I think that they'll consistently have a solid defense. They'll consistently get talent at wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, running back. Like, that's never the issue. What they're missing is that Heisman type quarterback. And I think that has been the limiting factor. Ian Book, yes, he was good, but let's all be honest with ourselves. He was not a Heisman finalist type quarterback in my eyes. And that's what I think the program has been missing for some time. So I most importantly want to see a guy who can consistently develop quarterbacks and produce high-end quarterbacks year after year, not just a one-and-done type situation. Like, we start a carousel, like how, I know this is a bit dramatic and over the top, but Notre Dame is tight end and like offensive line the last 15, 20 years. It would be awesome if we could start saying that about quarterbacks, even halfway remotely kind of make that statement. And so for those reasons, I'm looking most at quarterback development and bringing in guys, recruiting class after recruiting class, and developing within these quarterbacks.
And where the program is right now, you've got a very veteran guy who you're going to have as your quarterback this year, but you've got three very raw but very talented guys after him, between Buckner and Carr and Minchie. And you've got to have someone who can get those guys ready to go and develop them and like be able to hit the ground running. Honestly, and that was something that obviously did not happen this year. The guy like Tyler Buckner didn't come out of the chute ready to hit the ground running. Now, again, in defense, could have used a better running game, could have used a better offensive line early in the season. It got better as the season progressed. Bygones, that guy's gone now. But my point is, Tyler, we saw what Tyler Buckner looked like, and he didn't look like a guy who was ready to come out of the chute. That's what you've got to have if you're going to be a top tier elite program. You've got to have a quarterback developer.
And I think the biggest frustrating thing for me is the lack of consistency at the quarterback position at Notre Dame. And what I mean by that is I feel like Notre Dame often recruits quarterbacks and then molds their offense around, what that quarterback can and can't do. It should be the opposite. You should be bringing in a guy that fits your offensive system and gets better and elevated by learning that system. Like, the system should breed the quarterback. The quarterback shouldn't breed the offense, essentially. Right. And I think that's been the biggest frustrating thing is we've seen too many different types of quarterbacks at Notre Dame and just different skill sets, right? Like certain guys could do this, certain guys could do that. It should be more along on these guys should have more similarities than than dissimilarities when coming in.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. You need, like, just look at the different kind of quarterbacks that we've seen over the last few years, between Ian Book to Jack Cohn, Tyler Buckner, completely different than any of them. Drew Pine, more like Book or Cohn than Buckner. And now you've got a couple, better athletes in Carr and Minchie both coming in as well. I completely agree. You shouldn't have to completely revamp and rework your offense, going from number one to number two. If something happens to number one, you should be able to pluck a guy in. Now, he's still going to have his strengths and weaknesses.
Right, there's going to be some things, but
there
shouldn't
have to
be
drastically alter
right.
every concept that you're running because of who the quarterback happens to be. Completely
Right.
agree. And there was a question, again, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, but the top 3 priorities for the OC. As an example, experience. What are your top 3 priorities?
I would say in no particular order: scheme, experience, development. And I think those are the 3 things. You got to have a good scheme. You got to be able to develop your quarterback, like we were just talking about, and you got to have the experience or track record at multiple pit stops, proven success along, across multiple disciplines or multiple, pit stops along your career.
Yeah, I would say experience, development, recruiting. And again, and not necessarily in that order, but I would put recruiting in there. He's got to be someone who can go out and recruit, and like that's the next thing to me is the recruiting aspect of it, because at least as of right now, Joe Brady is still a person of interest in this coaching search. And, I know there's some questions on some different guys, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But, I'll say this: the names that we said on yesterday's show, the names that Brian has said on his show, and the names that we're talking about today are the ones where there is some actual interest. Again, getting it from sources, there is actual interest in the people that we're talking about. I realize there are a lot of people still, throwing darts at the board, and what about this guy and what about that guy? But the names that we're talking about are, there is at least Notre Dame interest right now. Where that has gone, with any contact over the last couple of days, that's something that is, that we're all still working to find out, how much more we find out. But the recruiting aspect, again, it's like I go to a Moorhead or I go to an Andy Ludwig, guys who have been around for a long time and recruited at Power 5 programs. The biggest knock on, the biggest plus Joe Brady has is the season that he had with Joe Burrow. But that is still the only full season. It was not miraculous, but it was a whirlwind, jet ride rocket of a season. The season that Joe Burrow had, winning a national championship. And then, of course, Joe, what he's done in his short time, 3 years in the NFL, coming off of that time with Joe Brady, like, that's the biggest thing that Joe Brady has in his bank. What works against him is that is still his only full season is in college, because everything else has been NFL. And he's, on the record, going back to those LSU days, about not caring for recruiting in the least bit. Now, again, as I said yesterday, because of who he is and the reputation that he has, and because he would be at Notre Dame and working with Marcus Freeman, I would think recruiting would be a lot easier for him. But that is still the biggest question, I think, with Joe. The two biggest questions: does he want to, leave the NFL and come back to college? But right along with that, part of his reasoning would be, if the answer is no, at least based on what we know right now, is the recruiting aspect of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern I would have for someone like Joe Brady is, when you put Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase in a room, and you're told to coach. I understand that you still got to. It's like Sirianni. You still got to do things and put together plays and call the right plays and everything. but it's a lot easier when you have Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. Like those are all like 3 all-pro guys now in the NFL that you just kind of had fall into your lap in that 1 year. So that would be my biggest hesitation is, yes, he's only been in college for 1 year. He wasn't too, geeked about the recruiting. And he also had just like 3 generational studs on his roster
Yeah.
at the same time. So it's like, it's hard to judge, what would his success be like if he didn't have those 3 guys? And then, what if someone else came in? I just have a hard time believing that it would hard to fail in that situation, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm saying. And so, then you start looking at his track record in Carolina. I think that was just ultimately a bad situation all around. I don't think Rule fit. I don't think that.
Well, yeah, and that's Tyler Evans has the super chat. Brady was the scapegoat with the Panthers. He had Bridgewater and Darnold, and I'm a Panthers fan, Tyler says. And that is absolutely right. And it definitely helps when you get to go to Buffalo and you get to work with Josh Allen instead of Teddy Bridgewater and Sam Darnold. But Matt Rule obviously proved that he was not meant to be an NFL head coach either. It just seems like that whole like Steve Wilkes was the only good thing that came out of that, and he didn't even get to stay around after somehow he had them in playoff contention, going into the last couple weeks of the season.
Yeah, and again, like he's been the quarterback coach for the Bills the last couple seasons, and yeah, Josh Allen has taken some steps, but we've also seen some regression in Josh Allen's play in terms of the interceptions and kind of turning the ball over. And it's like I don't know what that correlation is between him and Joe Brady, but obviously Joe Brady's not out there throwing the ball or making decisions and stuff like that. But still, I've seen, a jump in Josh Allen's play. Don't get me wrong, but he's also kind of been crucial when it matters the most, and that's within the red zone. So I'm hesitant on Joe Brady. I think that he has great potential, but I'm also very hesitant at the same time. It's like to me,
Are
it's
you
a very
hesitant
like
because of the
big boomer
recruiting?
bust.
Are you hesitant because of the recruiting or just because of who
I'm
he's
hesitant
worked
because
with
his
in
biggest his biggest attribute again is with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson, and
a
I think a
one-off
lot of people
season?
could have succeed in that situation.
Okay. Even though they were drastically better in his 1 year than they were the year before he got there.
No, yeah, and again, like credit where credit's due. I just again, I just don't know. It's hard to say because obviously we saw the success that he had. There was like one of the greatest offenses of all time in terms of passing in college history. But what would that look like if someone else was running it? Would they surpass it? Would they come close? Would they become? Would they drastically come short? Like what would that look like? And so that was again, when you have that kind of talent in the room, that's just my biggest worries. To me, it just feels like a big boomer bust situation. It's either going to go
Yeah.
really well or really bad, and I don't think
I
there's an
mean,
in between.
yeah, there's definitely a lot less track record with him than the other guys, that we've talked about, whether it's Ludwig or Candle or Moorhead, obviously, and all these different guys. There's a lot less, especially college track record, but just track record, period. And the recruiting thing has to it does have to be part of the equation. Like there's no doubt. Like if you gave Joe Brady with this year's team, the 2023 team, a one-off situation, and said, Joe Brady, go work your magic. I'm sure it would look pretty darn good next season with Joe Brady in charge of the thing. But then, a couple of different things. How long is he going to stick around? And again, like what kind of recruiter is he going to be? And is he going, what kind of a developer for the next guy is he going to be? Because again, he didn't have to do that. He did his 1 year at LSU and then he got the NFL job, which it seemed like what he wanted. He kind of took that LSU job to give himself a chance to elevate his NFL stock. It does seem, like the more I listen to you and the, more, you sit back and think about it, when you look at who he has predominantly worked in the NFL. And that seems to be where he probably wants to be. He probably would have to be convinced that this is an ideal type situation for him to come. Yeah. I mean, money would talk. That's for sure. Cause you would get paid, I would assume, more to be Notre Dame's offensive coordinator than the quarterback coach of the Buffalo Bills.
I would agree.
Um, play calling, game plan, like how much of that, where do you weigh that kind of stuff in terms of importance?
Play calling to me just boils down to not getting stuck in tendencies, being kind of diverse on, maybe showing some run on first down, maybe showing some play action on first down, maybe on a second and long when everyone thinks you're passing, you hand the ball off. Like that's where I think situational play calling, I guess, is where I would put it at, like getting into certain areas of the field and having success. And again, not showing a lot of tendencies, right? Like not being, there's a lot of teams out there where depending on formation and down and distance, it's almost a lock that they're going to run the ball. So for me, I look at play calling as a situational thing, knowing where you are on the field, and again, not getting stuck in certain tendencies. So I know that's kind of short and simple, but that's really kind of how I look at it in terms of play calling. So I think play calling is kind of overblown in some ways. I think that the plays themselves are going to have success, and that's what's more important: the design of the play, and then knowing when to call the play, essentially.
Yeah, and again, I think when you're looking at a guy like, guys like whether it's Andy Ludwig in Utah or Joe Moorhead, like these guys have been around the block and they've called a lot of plays in their time, and they've developed a lot of different schemes for different teams. And so like for them, I think that like that kind of takes care of itself. And if you're Marcus Freeman and you're looking at it, you have film and you have, history and connections to these guys, and like what you're looking for, and you have a pretty general idea of what they're going to bring to the table when they get here. And again, because of the vast experience, like 2 decades you're talking about for each of those guys, like you talk about lack of track record with Joe Brady, and then you look at Moorhead and Ludwig, and it's like all track record. I think that some of that kind of takes care of itself. Do you think that? Do you think it's okay to sort of like take less from a recruiting standpoint if you have someone who is a great play caller slash overall teacher of the game?
Yeah, I think if you can say, hey, if you want to take 25% out of time out of your recruiting and devote that 25% to, developing your quarterbacks and implementing your system and kind of what we just talked about, creating a mold of what your quarterback should be able to do in your offense, I'm all about that because again, that's been Notre Dame's biggest deficiency is a consistent quarterback, play, the type of quarterback, and then obviously a quarterback that's going to be above average, potentially, like Heisman finalist type quarterback. So if you take away, just a portion of that recruiting and you're able to, add it to the development or the evaluation or, that sort of thing, or if you want to say, hey, we want you strictly, to kind of recruit, to do a lot of your work on quarterbacks, and we can kind of let some of the other guys handle running backs, wide receivers, that kind of stuff. As long as the quarterback position is being elevated, I think that's the most important concern because, again, that's just what Notre Dame's been missing. Like they've been missing that guy who can take them over the top at the quarterback position, a game changer, if you must.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like you look at some of the guys, these other guys have worked, again, it's not like one of the things that impressed me, like I was sitting here and I'm like doing these deep dives on both Moorhead and Ludwig, for example. And like I look at Moorhead. Oregon had 36 rushing touchdowns last year when he was the offensive coordinator without Bo Nix. 36 rushing touchdowns. And, it's like,
It's 3 a game.
Marcus Freeman, what's Marcus Freeman want to do? He wants to run the ball and stop the run and all that kind of stuff. 2 years ago, the 2020 season, now remember the Pac-12 didn't play a full season. I think they only played 7 games. Oregon did 13 rushing touchdowns. So, not quite on that same 36 pace, but that was his first season. He never had quarterbacks there either. He was only there for a couple of years. With Cristobal. So, like, again, this is a guy who's been a head coach for a long time. And like, I look at what he did with Trace McSorley and what he was able to wring out of that. And there's a lot to like there, but there's also a lot to like, from a guy like Ludwig, who, like he coached up Brian Johnson. Like, here's an old, like go back into the past Utah quarterback name. He came after Alex Smith, and it wasn't Alex Smith who beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. It was a guy named Brian Johnson who beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. After Alex Smith was gone, and Cam Rising the last couple of years, and Ludwig, he was coordinator at Cal for a couple of years. He recruited Keenan Allen to Cal. He had Javid Best when he was at Cal. So like he had some talent out there. So there are a lot of good things to like about, and like they've done some things running the football as well at Utah.
I was going to say, Utah has been very impressive in my eyes on what they've been able to accomplish offensively, because I think Cam Rising, he's not the greatest quarterback, but they, again, squeezed so much of his talent out of him and got every drop out of that. And it's like, that talent-wise, it's like you could almost make the case that, a lot of these prior Notre Dame quarterbacks have had more talent than someone like Cam Rising, yet he was able to get more out of Cam Rising than we've probably seen, Notre Dame get out of their quarterbacks in the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How important is hiring someone who or at least pretty confident is going to be around more than 1 or 2 years, as opposed to?
I think that is a very that is a very big part of the puzzle for me. I think that you want someone who's committed just as much as Marcus Freeman on the whole situation. Like they are hand in hand, eye to eye, leading the program with their vision. And a guy that's locked in for at least like 5 years, to be honest with you. I don't think that it's good to have rotating offensive coordinators, because then, scheme can change, how that affects recruits, all of that stuff. No one wants to see a revolving door at the offensive coordinator position. So to me, a consistency is much needed in terms of, how long that they're willing to stay at Notre Dame.
See, and that's what scares me about all of these guys, because, like Brady is young, but just what his track record has shown so far is, he would probably try to parlay it into another big job someplace down. And it's not that I'm faulting him for that, but, but then like Ludwig and Moorhead are both in their 40s. And one of them, it's like, these guys have been around. So like guys where they are in their career are looking to be head coaches. And again, I don't fault them for that, but it just feels like all of these guys are kind of in that range where, like, if you get 3 full seasons out of them, you're probably going to be lucky if you're as successful as you think they're going to be when you hire them.
Yeah, and Derek just made the comment that Alabama has had a revolving door. Well,
that's true. They also have Nick Saban. It's basically still Nick Saban's offense.
And when you're cycling in, a lot of 4- and 5-star recruit guys every year, it's just, I just feel like that's a different situation, and it's a lot like comparing.
That's still where Notre Dame's trying to get, not necessarily where they're at right now. But I mean, it is a fair point. But again, it's like Alabama is basically the outlier to every to everything.
And I think another important aspect for me, to be honest with you, and I didn't bring this up until now, is I think the relationship between Marcus Freeman and the offensive coordinator is paramount as well. I think that they need to see eye to eye overall on because there's stuff that Marcus Freeman wants to accomplish, right? Like he wants to be a power runner. And he wants to be able to, when the game gets towards the end, he wants to rely on his run game to finish off teams. Basically a finisher and an ender when it comes to the run game. In boxing terms, like you get a quick, at the beginning of the match, you let a guy know that you're there. You give him a headshot, and then at the end, you give him the knockout with your run game. And I think that's exactly what Freeman wants to do. And I think that the offensive coordinator needs to be synced up or married up with that kind of concept as well. There's just overall larger concepts that I think Marcus Freeman and the offensive coordinator need to be on the same page about. And I think that's another key aspect that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Chi-Town says, he's okay with everyone on the current staff getting a head coaching job because that means Notre Dame's winning. And I mean, that's absolutely right and completely fair as well. You win, you're going to matriculate guys who are going to move up the ranks, like the last couple of years. If you want to call them lateral moves, okay, but Kelly left to take another college head coaching job. Reese leaves to take another offensive coordinator job. If they're moving up the ladder, that's good. And then what you hope, again, is they're doing their job developing, and not just developing the guys on the roster, but their offensive assistants as well. And maybe that means that you get to a point where you can move your own guys up the ranks to kind of fill in some of those positions. All right, we had a few other questions. Chi-Town was also asking dark horse candidate for Notre Dame. And again, like, I don't know how I'm going to evaluate dark horse candidates, because the names that we have seen are the only ones we know right now. And, like Zach was asking about Heartline, and we were talking about Heartline last night. Based on all the information Irish Breakdown has received, Heartline is not a candidate and will not be a candidate. And this is also a guy who's a first-time coordinator himself. So it's not like he's got a ton of experience. And again, I think experience is a big factor in what you're looking for with this position, not necessarily a first-time coordinator. You agree? I think we both agree on that, right?
Yeah.
All right. Again, a question: do you know if Jason Gobelgardi from Boise State is a candidate? And again, based on everything we have heard right now, he is not. So I don't know if that's being reported someplace else or if that's come from someplace else, but I'll just, go back to the start of the show with Anthony saying, we were talking about Brian Johnson from Philadelphia. I just saw on Twitter Brian was flying to South Bend after Super Bowl was over. I don't know what Twitter account you saw it on, but I'll just go back to the beginning of the show. If it's a jabroni account, and it's not an account if it's not an account that's like a Notre Dame beat reporter, at least, like guys who are actually connected to the Notre Dame beat and people at Notre Dame where they would be getting this information from, you can put whatever stock into it you want. But I had a conversation with someone directly about Brian Johnson this afternoon, and the answer was no. So I'll leave it at that. And Chi-Town also asking you, Jesse, will it hurt Notre Dame if some of the top names for the Notre Dame offensive coordinator vacancy would want to bring along one of their own assistants or a GA with them?
No, I don't think so. I think that is just comfortability and, probably a proven system before of, divvying up tasks and, certain things that would aid and allow, said OC to kind of devote their attention elsewhere or prioritize, their attention to kind of more of the high level stuff. So, to me, if it's just a matter of what the offensive coordinator is okay with. Is it someone who wants to do it all on their own, and take on that responsibility, or are they comfortable with having someone, potentially help them, like a GA or an assistant, like I said, to kind of divvy up some of the lower priority tasks on a day-to-day basis? Because there's guys that got to break down film. There's guys that got to do kind of a lot of that grunt work. And so when you have, more hands on deck, I don't think that that's ever a bad thing.
Yes. I don't know how I can be more clear on the Brian Johnson. No, he is not being interviewed. You can put your stock in whatever BS Twitter account that you saw it on. I know it's floating around out there, but no. As of this moment, based on the information we have received, that is very good information, Brian Johnson is not interviewing, regardless of what jabroni Twitter says out there. That's all I can say right now. And again, I don't know where it came from, but again, I know, and it's floating around out there. And I started talking about this at the top of the show. There are a lot of, as Tyler James said, clout chasing social media accounts. They're basically nothing more than a Twitter account, maybe a guy, girl, whoever, who happens to subscribe to a couple of message boards or follows, somebody, who is actually reporting on the matter, like on the beat on the matter, whatever, beats they happen to be, and they're cherry picking someone else's information and spreading it around out there. So that's all I can say. As of right now, Byron Leftwich, no. Brian Johnson, no. All these other guys we've talked about today, still in play. And no other new names as of right now. I know they're making phone calls this week and talking to guys and all that kind of stuff, setting up interviews and everything else. So that's all I got right now. Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready for rapid fire. I thought we had a really good conversation about OC criteria, and now it's time to have a little bit of fun.
No, Josh, it was not the South Bend Tribune. So fill in the blank. It's blank that Marcus Freeman has to find a new offensive coordinator after a little more than a year on the job.
It is blank that Marcus Freeman has to find a new offensive coordinator. It is honestly unfortunate that he has to find a new offensive coordinator, because as I know that Tommy Rees was kind of a holdover, or kind of was acquired, and Marcus Freeman, whether he wanted him or not, didn't really have a say in the situation. But now it's when you're trying to get things rolling as a first year head coach and you're trying to establish certain things, I feel like the last thing that you want to lose is a key coordinator. And whether or not you think Tommy Rees is a key coordinator, that's up to you. But it's always vital when you lose someone like that, an offensive coordinators. And so now, to me, it's a big opportunity in Marcus Freeman's era. I think it's the biggest decision that he's had to make so far as, the head coach. And I think it's ultimately going to determine, what level of success Notre Dame has in the near future. I think that you have to hit a home run on something like this. And again, it's going to really determine what kind of success Notre Dame has in the next, obviously, 2 to 3 years in terms of things.
Yeah. And I think opportunity is the word you used. And that's the biggest thing to me for Marcus Freeman is this now 1 year into his tenure at Notre Dame, he inherited an offensive coordinator coming in, and the offensive coordinator had, he played for Brian Kelly. He coached under Brian Kelly. Most of what he, had in both his playing and coaching career was Brian Kelly. And so Marcus Freeman, he obviously coached for a year under Brian Kelly as well, brought him here. And, that helped him, was a big part, just being here and helping him get the job. But he now gets a complete reset on the offensive side of the ball. He gets to handpick the guy who's going to be in that position, who can set the identity for Notre Dame's offense for the foreseeable future. So I think it is a great opportunity for Marcus Freeman and a huge opportunity as well. So, I think I just think it's really good for him, because now he gets to be the guy to handpick that guy who's going to be his offensive play caller, quarterback developer, recruiter, the whole thing. He gets to handpick that guy. So I think it is a great opportunity for Marcus Freeman. Scale of 1 to 10. We haven't talked about Tommy Rees since last week. How badly do you want to see Rees succeed at Notre Dame? Scale of 1 to 10.
In terms of Rees's success at Alabama, I would put on my sliding scale, honestly, I'd put it at like 8 or 9. It is up there for me, because I think it only says, kind of good things about Notre Dame. I think that if you have a coordinator that started out at a program like Notre Dame and then could potentially go to a program like Alabama and have even more success, I think that it's a good look for Notre Dame. And more so, I think it'll quiet a lot of the jabronis, as you would say, it's talking all this kind of crap about Tommy Rees. I know he had, his what's the word? His like failures and stuff like that. And I get, that there was disappointments in the Stanford game and the Marshall game and the Cal game and basically all the games that they lost that they shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, I just, I do want to see him succeed, because I think he has a good scheme. And I think that he ultimately caught a lot of flack for maybe a lot of things that weren't necessarily on him. Did he have a part of them? Of course he did. But again, it's just, to me, it's a good look for Tommy Rees. I think he's a great young mind. in the game. And I want to see Tommy Rees take his game to the next level as well, because I think he's got a lot of potential talent. Like, I'd love to see Tommy Rees in the NFL someday.
Yeah, but like what happens, when you have an ex, you break up, you know, eventually everybody moves on, but do you really want to see your ex, with someone else, you know, that could be perceived as like better than you and have, like thriving and all that kind of stuff after you? It's like you want to see him with some loser for a while, right? But at the same time, it's like Tommy Rees is still a Notre Dame guy. He was still part of a team that played for a national championship. Obviously, Golick Jr. loves him, but it's like
Dan Orlovsky loves him.
I want to, like, I think the biggest reason, yeah, Dan Orlovsky does love him. The biggest reason, that Rees took this, I think it's because, like the NFL future, that he's kind of always, I think, had for himself out there, and I think that he thinks this gives him a better shot, So like, it's between like a 7.5 or 8 for me because of his Notre Dame connection and all that stuff. It's like I want to see him do good and be able to go on and take that next step, but it's like, do you really want to see him do that well, right after leaving Notre Dame when there were some ups and downs and all that kind of stuff here? But definitely want to see him succeed and just basically get that NFL job and go on and have that NFL career.
I just think that's ultimately what he's after. He talks about all this NFL film that he watches and da 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 da. I think his big picture, like bulletin board above his, desk every day is like NFL dream job. I just think that that's ultimately what he's working towards.
We are not Marshall. Rees dumped us for the hot chick. That's that may be right. That may be right. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Philadelphia Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni says he's had a chip on his shoulder since he was not retained as the Chiefs wide receivers coach when Andy Reid was hired by Kansas City in 2012.
It's just funny. Like, you're a wide receivers coach in Andy Reid's offense. Like, he has proven track record of, working, he's honestly one of the best offensive minded coaches in the NFL and probably the last 2 decades, for the work that he's done with the Eagles and the Chiefs. And so just because, a guy comes in and there's a fresh start and he probably has a guy that he's comfortable with and a guy that knows his scheme well and knows, what he's trying to accomplish and the innovation and all that stuff. I just think it's funny that he carries that chip, but if that's what gets him through the day and what motivates him, then that's, I can't blame him for that. But to me, I just think it's a little nitpicky, kind of funny that is what he holds on to ultimately.
Sirianni seems like the guy who's always got to like have a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah,
like,
just looking at him on the sideline, sometimes he always just seems a little deranged. Like he's like
that crazy look in his eye, man.
Like he just got bit by a squirrel with rabies or something.
I know.
It's just
well, like the whole thing. Remember when they went to Indy this year and they beat the Eagles, and he's like, that's for Frank Reich, because the Colts had fired Frank Reich and all that stuff. It's like, some guys, I guess, just got to carry that chip, and that's always got to be the thing.
Yeah, it seems like he's one of those guys who's always looking for the newest chip to get him through. Like
right.
He needs that push to get him through today or this moment or whatever the moment might be.
Right, and look, apparently, David Culley, the guy who ended up being the head coach in Houston for, I think he only got a season before Lovie Smith, but he was Andy Reid's receivers coach, and he brought him over with him from Philadelphia. And Sirianni was still like a young position coach at the time. He had been in Kansas City, just like when Marcus Freeman took the job here. Other than the agreement with Tommy Rees, it's like Freeman was under no obligation to keep a bunch of guys around, and he obviously parted ways with some different guys on the staff. And any coach who takes over, you're not obligated to keep anybody on just because they happen to be on staff, So I don't think anyone has any problem with Andy Reid bringing in his own guy. And, again, it's like Sirianni just out there looking for the next chip everywhere he looks. I mean, it's got him to the Super Bowl. See how it plays out for him this week. Speaking of which Super Bowl coach would you rather have as the coach of your team, Sirianni or Reid?
This is 100% no doubter, no brainer. Didn't think twice. Andy Reid, and I just, I've been on the record before. Again, Sirianni, give him credit for what he's done, but there's been a lot of things in place for him to succeed, and he's still running practices, still running game day, still, doing a lot of things. But I still think if you took Sirianni out and put in any average to above average coach, that they would have a lot of the success that Sirianni had. I still think that they've
You're back
had
in
one of the.
Julian Love still. You're back. You're with Julian Love
I
on
am.
this.
But I think that he's had a relatively, they didn't have to play a first place schedule in the regular season. The hardest teams that they got to face were the Cowboys and Vikings. Then you got to play Daniel Jones for the third time in the playoff, and then you got to go against quarterback 5 in the NFC Championship. So like that's not a hard path, in my opinion, when you're the only team that gets a bye week because you're the number 1 seed. So again,
We get it, Jess. Like every chance you've got, you mentioned the fact that they have had the easiest path to the Super Bowl.
I just had to reiterate it. And so when we're talking about a second-year head coach making it to
when
the
we
Super
talk
Bowl,
about the Super Bowl Friday, I'm sure you'll do the same thing.
correct. And then you talk about someone like Andy Reid, who's just been an innovator of the offensive game and changed the way that the offense is being run, and the consistent passing attack, and what he was able to do with Donovan McNabb and Michael Vick, and now Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs. There's just so much talent that follow and success that follows Andy Reid, and he does it his own way. He's his own play designer. He's his own play caller. The way he's revolutionized the offense in the last 2 decades, I would 100% love to be a part of Andy Reid's staff and learn all of the wisdom that he has.
Yeah, and I mean, a friend of ours is a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and he has a friend who's a Philadelphia Eagles fan. And I remember when Andy Reid got the job in Kansas City, the Eagles fan told the Chiefs fan, well, good luck. You'll never get to the Super Bowl. And, at that point, Kansas City wasn't even getting to the playoffs. And that's why Andy Reid got the opportunity right away.
Yeah, then he took Alex Smith to the playoffs.
That's exactly right. This is a guy, Andy Reid, who's been a head coach in the NFL for 25 years, and he's been to the playoffs 19 of those 25 years, and he's about to coach in his 4th Super Bowl as well. And this is, it's a Chiefs organization, one that, as I used to tell my Chiefs fan, you can go back to Len Dawson. Like Patrick Mahomes is the first homegrown quarterback that Kansas City has developed and turned into, like a legit star quarterback. And obviously Mahomes is at otherworldly level, especially considered to Len Dawson, but Len Dawson did win a Super Bowl as well. So my point is, like, they went decades, like 40 some years in between having legitimate homegrown franchise quarterbacks. And you can say, well, Andy Reid lucked into having Patrick Mahomes. Well, he's part of developing. Remember, Mahomes sat behind Alex Smith for a year, and Reid also got to the playoffs with Alex Smith and won 2 of the, they've won 7 straight division titles now. They won the first 2 with Alex Smith. It was before Patrick Mahomes.
The AFC Championship might as well just be called the Chiefs and Others game at this point.
That's right. So I don't know if I directly answered the question, but Andy Reid is obviously my answer as well. So speaking of quarterbacks, Russell Wilson just got a new head coach in Denver after Sean Payton was introduced yesterday. Michael Wilbon from ESPN says Wilson got bad coaching in Seattle, and that's his biggest problem now. Do you buy or sell it?
That's a big old sell for me. And, you brought up back-to-back topics that can get me pretty fired up. One, Sirianni and the Eagles, and now
I
Russell
knew you'd
Wilson.
like to get rolling on the danger Russell Wilson train.
Yeah. So let's put it like this. If that were the case, then Geno Smith would not have the year that he had this year after multiple failures as being, getting his shot at being a starter and ultimately being a career backup for the most of his career. And now you substitute in, really the only thing that changes is, you add in Geno Smith. And I think it just shows, I think it's the complete opposite. I think that Russell Wilson career probably got overinflated to a degree because he got to work with someone like Pete Carroll to kind of hide maybe some of the deficiencies that he might have. So I think that that's relatively a bad take by Michael Wilbon, and I think that ultimately he got bad coaching with Nathaniel Hackett, and I think that was just a bad marriage of the two parties, and it ultimately showed kind of the importance of Pete Carroll and maybe some of the deficiencies that Russell Wilson had covered up by being under someone like Pete Carroll.
Yeah, I think based on watching Russell Wilson the last couple of years, it's like his own, like his own head that's his own worst problem. I don't think it has anything to do with the coaching that he got. Like look at Pete Carroll and go back to his time at USC and Carson Palmer and Matt Leinart and that whole crew, and then going to back Super Bowls, winning one, should have won the other if they they hadn't thrown. But Russell Wilson there, like they, the whole let Russ cook and all that stuff, they let him cook for a year and he played pretty darn well. And then for whatever reason, the next year or two after that, it backslid and now he's out of town. I don't think it has anything to do with Pete Carroll, maybe Brian Schottenheimer for his time there. I don't know. But Geno Smith is the answer to this question, because if you're going to blame what's going on in Seattle, explain Geno Smith, who is basically a journeyman, backup quarterback. He had the 4th most touchdown passes and the 8th most passing yards in the NFL this year.
I'm pretty sure he had a ridiculous completion percentage as well. I want to say he led the NFL in completion percentage.
Yeah. You can't tell me that the Denver Broncos had any worse, a roster than what Seattle had. And look, I respect Sean Payton, but I think a couple of weeks ago, I think it was Field Yates or somebody like that, shared, they put Mike McCarthy's resume next to Sean Payton's resume, and they're virtually identical. And McCarthy has a few more playoff wins and regular season wins. Now, again, I'm not like backing it all in on Mike McCarthy. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, let's see Sean Payton prove it, because, he got a Hall of Fame quarterback to work with himself. And at the end of the day, he still only has one Super Bowl, and only went to one Super Bowl, so he's no different than Mike McCarthy, and Drew Brees is really no different than Aaron Rodgers, and Russell Wilson is no different than Aaron Rodgers. Let's see, and like Sean Payton today, he was getting some questions. I can't remember if it was today or yesterday after the press conference. He was asked about personal coaches and, having them around with, Russell Wilson and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, nope, that's not happening here. So it's going to be really interesting to see how those guys coexist there in Denver. All right. And by the way, Justin Fields and Davis Mills both had more touchdown passes this year than Russell Wilson. I just wanted to get that one in there.
Man, Davis Mills and all of that neck that he has.
Yes, that's right. The neck of Davis Mills.
It's just long.
Okay, so Stephen A. Smith says he wants to do late night television one day, potentially succeeding Jimmy Kimmel, if at all possible. Would you want to see that?
I here's the thing. I love and hate Stephen A. Smith, and there's obvious reasons why I dislike Stephen A. Smith, because of his feud with his good friend Michael Irvin. We can all see, where that's going to lead. But overall, I think that Stephen A. Smith, I think he'd be great at that. I think he's naturally funny. I think he's naturally genuine and honest. I don't think it's an act. I just think that's how he is. And I think that he could be good at something like that, especially the late night hours. You can get a little bit more kind of raunchy, a little bit more, say some things that you probably can't say on ESPN as often. And so I think that it would be ultimately pretty funny. I think Stephen A. is a genuinely he's just a genuine character, and I think that it would transcend well into kind of late night talk television, because I don't think he's afraid to ask or say things that would make people uncomfortable.
But is that really entertaining? I've seen him, he did the whole after the Cowboys loss and all that stuff, stomping and parading around, and is he really that entertaining? Why not just do a podcast? Why do you even need a late night TV show at this point? Does anyone even watch late night TV? I just think Stephen A. has a very specific, narrow audience.
That is true.
I don't think that he would play to a broad audience like you're looking for on late night TV.
That's true, because in late night TV, you're literally trying to gather everyone that's still up at that time. And I think that you would get a fraction of that with Stephen A. Because, like you said, I just think that there's too many people that have a feelings either way towards him, and I think it would already kind of isolate him.
Yeah. See, like, we're not Marshalls. I want baby Stephen A. Smith to be a late nighter. I can watch that all day on YouTube. Okay. Well,
That's pretty funny when they put the Snapchat filter on him and make him baby Stephen A. Smith. I like
yeah.
that.
We are not Marshall also said, I know we rib y'all about the Cowboys, but most of us in the chat are Bears fans. We're in year 34 of the rebuild. At least you've been to a Super Bowl more recently
That's true.
than the Cowboys.
The Devin Hester Super Bowl.
At least you have that. At least you have that. Last question for tonight. The National Enquirer was recently sold. Have you ever read the National Enquirer, Jess?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think so. I've seen them at stores, when like you're in the checkout line next to like the People magazine and the US Weekly and all of that stuff, but I don't think I've ever picked one up and read it for any reason. So I'm going to have to go with no. I have not read the National Enquirer.
Yeah, I think the last time I did, I was probably 12 or something like that in a grocery store. And it's like, like as Jason is saying here, it was big when he was a kid. And that's like, it's kind of like everything else that you used to find at the newsstand. It has slowly gone away. I think it's mostly, an online publication now. I honestly didn't even realize that it still exists, but it's like with things like Twitter and social media and just the internet, it's one of those things that have kind of left the consciousness. There was just always the entertaining, like the guy from Mars, is the guy next door, and whatever else that you would see in the National Enquirer at the newsstand. But I think the last time I probably ever picked one up, it's been a couple minutes ago. But I was just curious if you ever had, because again, it's like it's such a completely different media world that we're in, like TMZ for that matter. Like TMZ has taken up a lot of that space as well. A lot of that kind of juicy, if you even call it juicy, I guess.
Half the time it's real, half the time it's just gossip. You never know anymore.
That's exactly right. All right, well, great stuff tonight. Appreciate you all for joining us. It sounds like Henry's starting to get a little bit worked up and getting the cats even going there in the background. So we better be wrapping up here, I guess. Hit the like button if you would. We've got the mailbag show coming up tomorrow. So tell your friends, ask all the questions you want about offensive coordinators. And as Derek said, he quit when he met Elvis, and Elvis has left the building. So hit that like button, subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.
Peace.